What you see right here is the result of a Codex skill that I built. And using just one single ticker for any company around the world, you can get a result that looks just like this. A result that gives you not just the summary of what happened on that earnings call, but also understanding the natural language sentiment and natural language processing, also extracting out all the key KPIs that matter for you as an investor. And today, what am I going to do? Today, I'm going to show you exactly how to build this, and I'm going to give you my exact skill so that you can steal my skill and run this for yourself. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dave Wang. I am the CEO of Wall Street Prompt. I've trained over 4,000 Wall Street professionals from places like JP Morgan, Millennium, Point72, and more. And I'm also an official global ambassador for OpenAI's Codex, where I advise and build financial services products for their team. Now, if you don't want to learn how to build a skill and you want to just use the skill that I've pre-built, the download link is in the description below. So a skill, as you probably know, is a way for you to turn any sort of repeatable process, for example, analyzing earnings calls, into a set of instructions, and a set of instructions that is easily readable by tools like Claude Code and tools like Codex. By taking advantage of these special set of instructions, you can move off of one-off prompting into reusable skills and reusable instructions so that every single time that you analyze things like earnings calls, which of course you're doing all the time as an investment professional, you can have very reliable results because AI knows exactly your taste and preferences. Now, there are three ways where you can actually build a skill. You can either start from scratch by defining exactly what you're looking for. You can also extract it, right? So if you run a one-off process and AI sees that result of the one-off process, it will remember all the tools that it called, and it will remember all the logic that you explained to AI, so that at the very end, after you have a fantastic result, AI can wrap that fantastic result into a reusable skill. So that's method 2. And then method 3 is a recording function. So native within Codex, if you are on the Mac ecosystem, you can actually screen record you doing one particular piece of process. So for example, downloading a data room, and Codex will automatically remember all the different little steps that you did so that it can repeat that skill going to the future. So for today, we are going to focus on method 1, which is basically starting from scratch. We have an idea of what we actually want Codex to do for its skill creation process, and we are going to define this process together with Codex. Now, how do you actually create a skill from scratch? And I'll tell you exactly how. First of all, you need to make sure you're picking the right task, right? So the tasks that you pick are the ones that are actually recurring and the things that can actually be generalizable. So for example, things like thematic research, terrible candidates for skills, right? You don't want to be creating skills for the sake of creating skills. So you want to create something that's actually generalizable and something that's actually a recurring type of task. Second thing is you want to gather examples, right? So the best practice is if this is something you've done in the past, you want to gather examples and show AI what is good, right? What is the example of something that is good so that AI can study it and find out all the details it needs to reverse engineer what is good. Next, you want to define the inputs, right? So where are the data sources coming from? So in this case, we want to ask AI to actually scrub the internet and search for primary sources being the actual earnings transcripts themselves. Afterwards, we want to define together with AI all the different decisions and steps that AI needs to successfully do in order to complete its task. So in this example, right, we want a couple sections within our earnings transcripts analysis, right? First of all, we want to make sure that the formatting is correct, right? So what is the formatting? We want an HTML document in this case. What are the actual analysis that we want? So the analysis here include, for example, summarizing. So what actually happened? So at the very top, what is the summary of what happened on this earnings call? Then we want to understand all the key KPIs. Then we want to also understand natural language processing. So across all the different quarters, what were the positive and negative words? Count all of those and graph out a trend line. So a time series trend line of what actually happened across all the last 4 quarters. We also want to count the number of hedge words. How combative were the CEO, the CFO, and all the other participants from the company versus, say, the sell-side guys. After AI gives you the skill, you shouldn't trust it blindly. That's only the start, right? AI will give you the skill, it will give you the zip file, it will install the skill on your computer, but can you trust it fully? Not yet. There are a lot of edge cases that you have to iron out, and that ironing out process does involve verification. A/B testing the result is how you go from an okay skill to a great skill. So we are actually going to build this together, and I'll show you the exact prompt that we were going to run, right? So I will show you exactly how to do this. First thing that we want to do is we want to click on planning mode. So click the plus button and go to the plan mode. Second thing is I want to run this on the 5.6 Soul model. So let's go to the Soul model, and I think you can use either the Max or the Ultra. So I'll actually use the Ultra on this case. Now, for this one, I am actually going to use voice to text, and I will think of the prompt for us to create together, right? So we are going to create this on the fly using the voice to text prompt. I am a sophisticated long-short equities hedge fund manager, and I want to build a skill together. So please use the planning mode in order for us to build a skill together. And what I want the skill to actually do is to analyze any sort of earnings transcript so that we can analyze not just a summary of what happened on that earnings call, but I also want to extract out all the key KPIs that the public market investors are analyzing for that particular piece of public equity name and that ticker. And I also want to do sentiment analysis, right? So I want to do natural language processing across the last 4 quarters and understand the positive versus negative scoring across this quarter and the previous 3 quarters from the latest earnings transcript. And I also want another section on the analysis of hedge words, right? So how often are the executives actually hedging their statements and what can we learn from that, right? So count explicitly the number of hedge words that the executives are using and compare that across time. Is the hedge rate increasing or decreasing? Again, please use the planning mode and ask me any clarifying questions that you might have in order for us to be fully aligned for this particular task. Thank you so much. So a couple things to highlight as part of this prompt here, right? So first of all, we have a long context dump at the very top, right? So context dump in terms of what I'm actually looking for and in terms of the methodology. And we also have a couple key things here, right? We have, first of all, triggering the planning mode, and we are asking AI to ask any sort of clarifying questions so that we can really define this planning mode together before AI actually goes out and creates this skill. Now, what I'm going to do off camera is I'm going to spend probably 30, 40 minutes to actually put this together, and I will come back with the actual result for the skill itself. So as you see here, Codex came back and it spent an hour and a half building a skill. And there's one more thing that I want to actually highlight to you that makes this skill perform incredibly well. So the thing I want to highlight is under the hood for this skill, how I designed it is a multi-folder architecture. And this is the gold standard for building any sort of skill, whether you're building on Codex, Claude Code, or any sort of agentic platform, right? A skill is basically just a set of instructions. And if you are only giving it a skill MD file, right, you are unable to give the appropriate complexity, especially once you get into more complex tasks beyond, say, for example, earnings call analysis, right? So say, for example, you're doing any sort of quant work, there's just no chance you can actually get any sort of complexity if you're packing everything into a skill MD file. So how do you actually solve that? You solve it with the proper architecture of the folder structure of your instruction set, right? So a skill MD file basically is just pointing AI towards the right direction. So it's basically giving, say, tools like Codex, the right direction to point towards on a routing basis, right? And that routing goes to the specific instructions. And the instructions folder is basically a set of markdown files on how to handle edge cases. How do you handle formatting? How do you get, for example, the raw documentation? How do you basically handle all these different edge cases? So a big set of different markdown files within instructions. Now, these two are also pretty critical for building fantastic financial product skills, right? So one here is the evals section. And I think this is probably the most important thing. So for an evals section, what I have in here is short for evaluations, right? So before AI comes back with the final result, it actually goes through the process of checking its work, right? So I have an agent underneath that is simulating, say, a analyst, right? A junior analyst that checks for any sort of hard errors and soft errors. I also have a portfolio manager agent or persona in here that actually checks for the narrative. Is this actually useful for me as an investor? And can I actually get anything out of this, anything actionable? And is this actually useful for me as a portfolio manager for me to make investment decisions? And then finally, I also have a folder for good versus bad. So giving it actual examples of what a good result is versus bad. And if you combine all this, what is the end result? The end result is anytime you run a skill, AI checks its work and gives you the best result possible before you as a human actually touch it. And that's actually how you save the most time. If AI has any sort of leakage on this sort of errors, then of course, the best case is you waste a lot of time actually catching those errors and you can't actually trust the results. But the worst case is you actually make capital decisions off that. And of course, you shouldn't be making capital decisions off of faulty data. and faulty results. So this is one of my key techniques that I baked into the planning mode as part of the prompt that I triggered that you saw earlier to have the result be a 10 out of 10 result. So how do you actually run it? I'll show you exactly how to run it, and we'll go through the results itself. By the way, if you actually want to download my skill, I'm giving it to you for free. Check the link below and hopefully you can follow along. So let's trigger this skill. Very easy to trigger. You use the $sign, and I call this the earnings call analyzer. Very creative name, no? So I call this the earnings call analyzer, and we're going to run this on Meta because I own some Meta stock. Cool. So let's run this on 5.6 Ultra, and all you have to do is hit run on this case, right? Very easy because, again, we've encoded all the instructions into this packet of skills, and even though it's just one single line prompt, there is a huge amount of complexity underneath for the instruction set. So Codex came back, and I'll show you the result of this run, right? So first of all, as you see, I defined this as an HTML output because HTML is sexy. Look at this, fucking sexy, right? Looks way better than just a, call it chatgpt.com, text-based output. Very easy to read, right? So, we love visual appeal. So take a look at this, right? So I'll go through this section by section of this Meta Q2 26 earnings call. So first of all, we have an executive view. Take a look at this. We have all the summary of what changed and cited sources. So if we actually want to see what happened and audit this for ourselves, we can actually click these links and go to the raw sources. And having auditability and traceability is very important because I like to have the philosophy of trust but verify. So you have to verify any sort of facts. Now let's take a look at this. And this is how you differentiate versus just a simple summarize this earnings transcript type of prompt into something that's way more fancy and way more advanced and something that can take you to the next level for earnings call analysis. So we have a time series of the natural language sentiment across the last 4 quarters, right? And we have a proper scoring for this quarter versus last quarter versus, say, a year ago. And we also have the number of hedge words, right? So taking an actual count of the raw words versus the number of total words that were spoken and seeing how, call it, combative the executives were. So as you know, if there is some points of uncertainty, the executives will tend to say fumble their words or have these sort of hedge words, which, oftentimes is not a good sign, especially if they're getting asked tough questions. As we see here, this most recent quarter had hedge words rate down about 18.6, right? So this is the scoring of the sentiment versus the prior quarter. And then we also have the breakdown in terms of the natural language sentiment across all the different sections of the earnings call. So prepared remarks versus executive Q&A versus Zuck himself and the CFO, Susan Lee. We have a breakdown of the actual hedge language. We have a section on all the guidance changes. So this is actually quite critical in terms of if you want to blitz through multiple different companies. So say, for example, your coverage universe is 100 different stocks. This is the money section, right? The money section is understanding all the key KPIs that you as a public investor should care about for this particular ticker. So for Meta in this case, right, what actually moves Meta stock, at least right now, is the CapEx projections, right? So, prior expectations were 125 to 145 billion. They raised this to 130 billion floor to 145 billion, which this was the primary reason why the Meta stock tanked, right? So if you want to just blitz through multiple different tickers at the same time and understand the key KPIs that are moving the stock at the time, this is an area to pay attention towards in my skill. Right. So take a look at this. This is what actually moved the stock. If you're doing financial modeling, so say, for example, you are updating your models, right? This is the next section, which is the KPIs across, everything that matters for the company. So what are the KPIs for, say, revenue, the family of apps, which is a part of the metrics for revenue for Meta, et cetera, right? So all the key KPIs that actually matter for Meta as you do these sort of model updates. And then finally, let's take a look at this. So this is the Q&A pressure point. So what are the sell-side analysts paying attention towards? And let's extract out all the key questions and question themes that sell-side analysts are talking about for this particular quarter. So we have, for example, of course, for Meta, how can they return on their AI CapEx? We also have a section on the enterprise route to market, funding the infrastructure build, and recommendation for system runway, right? Finally, we have a section on risks and monitoring. So what are the key risks that the executives are talking about, and what are the key risks that the market is paying attention towards for Meta's most recent quarter. If you want to check any of the raw documentation, I have baked into Logic for this skill also all the sources, methods, and limitations so that, again, you can trust but verify. So this is a skill that I personally use for all of my earnings transcript analysis. And if you want to get a copy of my skill for free, check out the download link instructions on the description box of this video. Thanks a lot and subscribe.